Welcome everyone to the Clinton Donnelly Show. Hey, I'm really excited today to have Michael Raanan here with us. He is a specialist in tax resolution. Now, tax resolution is everything that happens once you file your tax return. When things turn south, that's tax resolution. It can be an audit, or it can also be once you have a tax that's owed, then you have amounts that you have to pay, and how do you pay that? Another set of challenges. And the IRS is complex, and probably the best way to find out how to do these things is to work with someone who's worked on the inside at the IRS. And that's why Michael's with us today. Thank you, Michael, for being on our show. Michael used to be a revenue officer, which would be like the tax collector, if you will, at the IRS. And that he brings that expertise to help the everyday person. Today, he's a private individual, and he can be your man on the inside.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Clinton. Yeah, that's right. So I was a revenue officer, which is the stereotypical tax collector that a lot of people think of when they think of an IRS agent. So I was 8 years in the belly of the beast as a revenue officer and a tax collector out of Los Angeles County. And that was, for the most part, straight out of college. The economy was in the tank. At that point, when I graduated, I was looking for work, and I was at a job fair and ended up seeing these two very friendly IRS agents at the end of the tables there, and chatted with them. And long story short, ended up working there for 8 years.
That is a very funny story. It's almost identical to the story my friend Anthony Parent, who's a tax lawyer, says. He had gotten out of he'd gotten his law degree, and he was looking for what to do, and he went to a same sort of job fair, and they didn't hire him, so he
Oh,
decided to join the opposition.
very interesting. Yeah, it was in 2004, and the IRS had, I guess they were given a budget, finally some funds, and they were hiring something like 2,500 positions,
Isn't that
which is a
incredible?
really big hire for the IRS. So they had positions all over the United States, and there was a long application process. It was very thorough. It was actually very impressive for the government, and then you could pick your 5 top post of duties. And the one I ended up at was Glendale, California. And prior to that, I never heard of Glendale. I've heard of Los Angeles, but Glendale is kind of a suburb inside of LA County. So that was my first post of duty, and it was quite an interesting journey there.
So tell me, I read a book about a guy who was a former IRS insider. He was basically in the collection side, and he told stories. And of course, these are old stories, old ways of doing things. They would somebody had wasn't paying his bill, said he didn't have the money, and he would parked his car out in front of the person and check to see his cars and who was coming out, just monitoring for signs of wealth, I guess, to go after people. And they'd tell all these stories. Now, this is a little bit more old school, but the IRS doesn't operate that way so much now, right? I mean, how does the IRS do collections when they have people who aren't paying now?
Yeah. So when I started at the IRS, it was 2004, and almost every single colleague of mine in my office was much older than me. So I was 22 when I started there. And these folks have been there for 25 years, 35, 40 years. There was someone at the IRS who was there for 60 years, 60 years. And all they got was a nice little medal from the commissioner. So they were telling me stories, right? They would say that they would invite the taxpayers or summon them to the IRS office. They would park in the parking garage of the IRS building, and they would put them in the meeting room. And then while the taxpayer was in the meeting room, they would go down to the parking garage and seize their vehicle. And this was before 1998, before the Reform Act happened, and there was taxpayer rights. So they would go down there and do that. As soon as they put that seizure sticker on the car, it becomes the property of the United States government. But again, this was before I started, so I would hear these stories. But now, there are so many opportunities for us as taxpayers to resolve the case without any enforcement. And I always tell my clients, I say there's absolutely no reason there should be any enforcement on this case ever. And the reason for that is because once you understand how the IRS procedures are, all you're doing as a taxpayer is remaining on offense. And all that means is you're moving your case to the resolution based on the procedure. So even if there's a disagreement, that's perfectly fine. You're discussing the disagreement, but things shouldn't escalate to enforcement, especially seizures. I mean, seizures are so rare nowadays. Taxpayers shouldn't even consider it.
Mm. So tell me so you get a bill from the IRS and it says, you owe, a staggering amount of money that you're uncomfortable paying. Don't really think you really owed that taxes in the first place, but now you got a bill, you know, and let's pick a number, 100,000, what do they do? How can you help a client when they have this very clear-cut bill?
Yeah. So almost everyone at some point is going to get a notice from the IRS. Some might be more threatening than others, especially as the sequence of the letters come out. But what does someone do? Number one is open the mail right away. No one likes these love letters from the IRS, but you have to open them because some of them have deadlines. So what do? You just take a deep breath and understand that there's actually a way to resolve the case. So even if someone has $100,000 bill, doesn't mean you need to pay 100,000 right away. It may even mean you don't need. Maybe the 100,000 is not even accurate. So is the liability accurate to begin with? That's what we look at. And we have cases where there's a lot of money owed, and hundreds of thousands of dollars go away just on one period, not because of any magic that we're doing, just because we check the period to see, is this liability even correct, before we start looking at the other resolutions, which are payment plans, penalty abatements, settlements, things of that nature. So
And
open the piece of mail right away is the number one thing.
this is, we're recording this now. It's August, and probably September by the time it gets published. And you're starting to get a lot of these, national marketeers on the radio, saying, oh, tax relief now. I mean, I'm hearing, Sean Hannity, who almost does no ads, has a show out there where he's promoting some tax resolution company whom I've never heard of, to resolve things. And I actually had occasion early in my life to be involved with one of these firms that did tax resolution, and it always struck me that they really exploit the fear and panic inside a client or a taxpayer who's received one of the letters, love letters as you called it, that they owe a lot of money. People are in a tremendous state of panic, and these companies exploit them. I mean, and I know a lot of them run pretty close to the edge of the law in terms of how they do things and represent things. What have you seen? You're much closer to that whole issue.
Yeah, I consider myself very fortunate. When I was 8 years in the IRS, I was working across the table and the phone lines from these unscrupulous tax relief firms. So it's just the taxpayer cases happen to retain these firms. So I know the ones that are not good. I know the ones that take advantage of taxpayers. And then for the last 14 years or so in the private sector. I'm also aware of these tax relief firms because I get the victims. They end up finally finding us or get referred to us. And I say, what's been going on with the case? They said, oh, I hired so and so company and, heard them on the radio and they promised pennies on a dollar. They promised they were the only ones with a former IRS agent on staff, and all this stuff. I'm like, what happened? And they start telling me all these incredible stories, and they were all victimized. They were told things that can't actually happen. We have clients who have paid $75,000 and more to these tax relief companies when it wasn't warranted, wasn't even close to warranted, and a whole bunch of things. I mean, they send me these clients, these victims of these tax relief companies, send me copies of the engagement letter, and they send me copies of the threatening letters from their legal counsel. So I have letters from their former tax relief company saying you must remove this negative rating and review on the internet, or else. Or they say if you remove it, then we'll go ahead and refund you a tiny portion of what you paid to us on the deposit, and so forth. So all they do is burn and churn these taxpayers. And there's a company I know of. They spend $5 million, a minimum of $5 million per month. So that's $60 million a year on marketing and advertising, and all they do is cast a big net for volume, and they do absolutely nothing on behalf of the taxpayer. So it's a big problem.
It's a terrible fraud because they're taking advantage of people who are who are at a very vulnerable position. I mean, let alone you're scared of the IRS, not to realize you're now dealing with somebody who's going to threaten you as well later on. That's just wrong.
It's completely wrong. Yeah. And, there's over the years, and I did a blog post on the most common tax relief scams. It's probably one of the most popular web pages on our site. And it goes into exactly how they do it. And, they even changed their name. They use the Better Business Bureau, which is a for-profit entity. So you and I could open up an entity today, and tomorrow we could have an A+ rating on the BBB if you want to. So there's a lot of manipulation tactics. They completely control all the rating and review companies. They own them. They use alter egos or nominees and different names in order to separate themselves. So they're rating themselves number one, or number two, or number three on there to make it look legitimate. So there's a whole bunch of nasty games that they play in order to maintain and what they're doing, and in order to preserve their investment in this scheme.
So, is it really possible for someone to negotiate with the IRS once they've gotten the bill?
So the thing about this word negotiation, we hear that a lot of these advertisements. So you can't negotiate with the IRS in the sense that you can in the private sector. And at the same time, the IRS can't say I like Michael or I don't like Michael. I'm going to do this or do that. The IRS has to follow their manual. So they actually have an internal revenue manual, and it tells the IRS and it tells the taxpayer how are they going to evaluate what this taxpayer's resolution should be. And that's the beauty of IRS collections. So the tax code itself is very complicated, but the IRS collections unit has a finite amount of options, and they have a finite amount of procedures. So once you know their procedures, and we share them with our clients all the time, and we explain to them, we say, hey, this is the only options available. These are the handful of options. This is how they evaluate it. And based on what you qualify for, you may end up paying less than the full amount that you owe. Not because we're so great at negotiation, or they're doing us a deal, but because we know what the procedures are. So you can end up paying less than you actually owe, but not because of any magic, only because that's what you qualify for based on the technical procedures.
Hmm. So tell me, the IRS has been changing a lot. I mean, I was they in 2025, Trump reversed a lot of the hiring, and they had early retirements. So there was like a 25% headcount reduction. So a lot of the open projects fell on the remaining staff, and I think they're kind of clearing those through. And I was just on a call uh, with it was just a conference call. And this guy was saying that the IRS collections has not been as strenuous in recent years, but that they believe that I shouldn't say collections. I think he was talking about examination, but they hasn't been as intense as in previous years. But they believe that they're about ready to ramp up, and get much more aggressive. Just because you know how it is at the IRS. Sometimes they're hot, sometimes they're cold. I mean, what's your take on headcount reduction in the IRS? What's that meant to the collection side, and how has the new IRS management responded to these staffing challenges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think this is a perpetual problem. So yeah, they did lose a lot of staff. Has there been an actual effect? It depends on on everyone's individual experience with the IRS. And what I mean by that is that they've always been hard to reach. They're massively behind on responding to things. I never had the experience with the IRS where they were efficient at anything. And so for me, it's kind of a constant, because of the work we do. We just focus solely on back tax cases. So the IRS is unresponsive. Even the revenue officers, which are the folks at the local offices, they don't answer their phone. They don't answer the fax. They don't understand. They can't say they can't access their email. So it's been very problematic since day one. And the ridiculous thing is, even when I was at the IRS, Clinton, I had the same problem, because when you're working on cases at the IRS, you don't do everything on the case. You can't process a tax return. you could collect it, and then you got to send it to some unknown colleagues on the other side of the IRS system, right? Of this machine. So we could even know how to contact those people. So people within the IRS can't contact each other. They have no idea who works on what, nor do they have access to those people to see what's happening. And then all of us as taxpayers or practitioners also can't reach the IRS. So for me, over the last 20 years or so, it's been a constant where the IRS has become moved from slow and inefficient to just literally dysfunctional, lack of function. Um, and it's not getting any better. There was one of the commissioners on LinkedIn posted a newspaper editorial that he did with 3 or 4 other commissioners. Okay, so it took about 5 or 6 of them to write one article, and I posted something on there that wasn't highly critical at all. It was just a neutral comment, and the commissioner ended up blocking me on LinkedIn, which is very interesting. So I made one comment. That was the very first interaction, and it wasn't that I didn't say anyone's name or anything. So it was very interesting. I think the comment was along the lines of, in any organization, it's always a leadership that should take accountability, something along those lines, you know. And I went to go check my comment, and it wasn't there anymore. So I realized this guy blocked me, and he was, a recent commissioner at the IRS. And what's interesting about that is that in my LinkedIn profile it says former IRS agent. So this is how the commissioner's mindset is, the former commissioner, of a actual former employee of the organization that he's running, and for any of us that runs an organization, whether big or small, you take accountability, right, for your people. You take accountability for your operation, and you're the responsible individual, right? The buck stops with you, when you're in a leadership position. So I thought that was really telling and very interesting. So what does that tell me? That tells me that until we get an entrepreneur in there, until we get someone who understands leadership, and actually wants to make a change, this organization, the IRS, is ripe for a change, and it could be very, very efficient. You could get rid of probably 50% of the existing staff and run this thing more efficiently.
Hmm. I know I did see the commissioner. Well, he's not a commissioner now. He's the CEO. Biznati. I can't remember his it's kind of crazy last name, but he is actually he's from the business arena, and he's run several companies, and he's kind of like a heads down. I think he demands solutions to things, and we've seen a lot of improvements in how the IRS does things. He's really just demanding them perform. So I think he's brought a little bit more intensity, whereas previous commissioners that we've had have been more political appointees, and they're just trying to write it out, and make a little improvement. This guy actually is bringing more of a business mindset to it. Yeah, but then he's going to hit the inertia of the deep state called IRS, and there's a lot of inertia there, and as you described, even naturally built in roadblocks from being cooperative. It's just frustrating.
Yeah, yeah, it really is for everyone. The practitioners are trying to help, and they're telling me all the time, I can't get through to the phone lines. I can't even talk to a human being. It's been like this for years, and being in practice is, the phone lines hang up on you. The employees, I mean, the way they're hiring, the biggest change, if they were to ask me what should they do, is train the people on the phone lines. They're completely upset. They have attitudes. They're completely incompetent. They're untrained. They don't want to be there, and they hang up on you. They don't want to deal with the calls, and I don't know who's doing the hiring of the people on the phone lines, but I mean, I've never come across any group, at any organization like the ones on the phone lines. I mean, it never fails. 9 out of 10 times, they're unhelpful. They can't even give you a piece of information. So it's very frustrating for practitioners and for taxpayers alike.
There was one time, this is back before call and queue. I was on. I'd called the Priority Practitioner Services, which is an internal, for tax practitioners, way to reach some people who can be helpful at the IRS. I was on hold for 40 minutes, and finally, and of course, you got it listening in the background, right, while you're working. Finally, someone comes on. The guy is snoring. Somehow it must have automatically flipped on because he was so bad. There's so many stories. I'm sure you got some of your own. Hey, a lot of our clients at Crypto Tax Audit are wealthier. They have a lot of assets, and but one of the challenges they have is that they don't always understand when capital gains occurs or other types of income. They have more of a naive uh, aspect of the taxing of investors. Whereas, if you traded on, say, a regular brokerage, they'd be keeping you posted on your gains, whatever, but not so much on crypto because you could be trading outside the United States and different things. So a lot of people at come tax season, they get surprised when they got a big tax bill because they weren't expecting it. They didn't make estimated payments. So it's a real shock to them. And I can give you one story of a guy who had roughly $4 million of Bitcoin that he'd put up as collateral for a loan, and the price of Bitcoin went down, and the value of that collateral was less than the loan, and so the part as the deal of the loans, it instantly got sold, right? So it was an instant capital gains event. He didn't appreciate that. Also, he had a home invasion and had uh, several millions of dollars stolen from him, by force. So when we came into doing his taxes, here it is. He lost a lot of millions of dollars through theft, and he had $4 million of crypto that were liquidated, and he's feeling rather poor at the time. But we do the tax calculation, and even though there's this write-off for the tax loss, he also has a big tax bill to pay for the liquidation of the loan. And so on top of all that pain, he owed a couple million on taxes, and he was in a very painful position. So the I mean, we can calculate the taxes, we can come up with the right number at Crypto Tax Audit, but paying the bill comes out of his pocket. Uh, but how can you help? This is why it's very important for people to understand what their options are and how they can mitigate situations like that. I have another client right now who, not because of me, because of choices he made, he got a love letter from the IRS looking for 1.5 million for things happening in 2023. So he has to come up with that plus the interest and stuff. How, I've always said a great tax practitioner pays for himself. That if you really know what you're doing, it's better to use that person than it is to try to do it yourself. Uh, and even in a big situation like that, how can you help someone like that? What sort of advice? How can you bring leadership to that sort of person and help him rescue it?
Yeah, we see these larger dollar liabilities all the time. And the interesting thing about that, the approach is very similar, because the IRS procedures don't change just because it's a larger dollar amount. But when we look at these cases, we do the financial analysis in the same way the IRS would look at it. So we get a financial form that the IRS uses, and then we start going to work and figuring out, okay, what is the IRS going to calculate in terms of this taxpayer's ability to pay, just simply based on the math from the financial. We look at the assets, if any, that the taxpayer has. Is there equity in those assets? And then we also look on the other side, which is, the IRS side of information. So what periods are we talking about? Are these 2013 tax years? Are these 2024, 2025 tax periods? How much time is left on the collection statute date for the IRS to collect? Because even though it's supposed to be the big bad IRS and they're supposed to be a pit bull, they're actually not. The IRS only has 10 years to collect a back tax. And we look at all those technical facts of the case. And we see where is there potential for a favorable resolution on the case, and how do we prepare the financial form before we share it with the IRS in a way that's as favorable as possible, but still within the IRS rules, and try to achieve a low dollar installment agreement if possible. And a low dollar installment agreement, for example, may end up um, with a small portion of the overall liability paid before the rest of it expires. You know, so we look at different things and see, all right, now that we know the lay of the land of the client, how does the IRS rules apply to that? And where do we have room to go? And what should we be pursuing? Should we go left and pursue this resolution or this avenue? Or should we go this direction? Or sometimes it's a combination. Can we have a low dollar payment plan for this client that owes $1 million? And can we also get some of the penalties and interest abated? Is that a possibility on this case? So we do reviews on everything. Every single case we handle, we look at every single opportunity that exists in the IRS manual. And then we decide, should we pursue this or not pursue this? If it's not applicable, we don't pursue it. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of our clients' fees and effort. So we don't do that. But we look and see, all right, is an offer in compromise applicable? Many times it's not. But can we get an offer in compromise, an effect of an offer in compromise, where you're only paying a percentage of what you actually owe through maybe a low dollar payment plan and waiting out the statute, right? Or a hardship and waiting out the statute. We have clients, Clinton, where there's millions of dollars owed to the IRS, and there's actually assets with equity. And the IRS is the one who approved the low dollar payment plan of $100 a month. The IRS is the one that approved the currently not collectible status, which is a hardship status. Why? Because of the financial form and because the proof and verification of the financial form. So everything the IRS does shouldn't be willy-nilly. Again, they can't say they like Michael, they don't like Michael, and come up with some arbitrary way to approach Michael's liability. They have to take a systematic approach based on their procedures. So once you know their procedures, then you could move forward accordingly. So that's what we do in every case, whether it's $10,000 owed or whether it's over $1 million owed. We do that. And then the second thing we do after we resolve the cases, we ensure that our client does not ever end up in front of the IRS again. So we do cause, cure, and compliance, just like the IRS did, just like when I was at the IRS. So cause, what's the cause? What's the cure to the problem? And then how do you maintain the compliance so that they don't end up on the radar of the IRS computer? Because today, and you know this, it's the IRS computer that's handling the cases.
I was that's really good. I mean, I would say this to add some color to what you're saying. I mean, you talk about knowing the procedures. It's more than just merely knowing the procedures. It's knowing how to finesse the procedures, right? It's knowing where the wiggle room is and how to restructure things when possible to leverage those procedures to give you the best advantage, right?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And when you're living and breathing IRS collections cases, that's where you end up, just by virtue of, repetitions and the work that you do. And for me, it's fun. It's like a puzzle, it's like any of the pieces of the puzzle all over the place. You can't even start putting the puzzle together yet. So you get all the pieces. So every case that comes across our desk is different. And for me, that's the enjoyable part, is figuring out what's going on, what's happening, what happened, before, and now what do we need to do moving forward. And you get to work with, at least in our case, like the best clients, because everyone comes to us, wants to resolve their case. They're very interested and they're working with you to resolve the case. And they're good people, they're ethical people. They just ended up owing because of various different things. Maybe they had a business they sold and there was too much they couldn't pay for. A whole bunch of problems, health reasons for their elderly parents or their kids, all sorts of problems that cause these liabilities. So we're working with the best taxpayers, and it's really enjoyable. I can't imagine doing this type of work with clients like some of these tax relief firms we talked about earlier, where you're just butting heads with them all the time, and trying to take advantage of them. So it's very enjoyable work. And yes, you got to know all the details of the procedures, and then you're able to finesse and maneuver appropriately.
That's very good. It's so important. I would just say this to people listening, is to always be talking to the IRS when you have to. Don't ignore them. Don't let the problems get worse, because if they feel they can't interact with you, then they eventually have to escalate to various enforcement activities, which are not pleasant. And that's where I think really your skill, Michael, as being a former revenue officer, you talk their talk, you can connect with them, and that means a lot to that tax collector, because you're talking his language. He understands where he's at. You guys have consensus and agreement. If he's got a problem with something, he can explain it to you in terms that you know the two of you understand, and you just talk his talk. It's like having an insider to have you working on someone's collections case.
It makes a big difference, and the revenue officers appreciate that. You know, the IRS employees, when you're speaking their language. You know, sometimes you do run into trouble with the service center. You know, with the folks on the phone lines, like I mentioned, because they have no idea what you're talking about. So you have to educate them. I'm actually telling them, Clinton, what command code to put in their computer, so you can hurry up and get the information and just read it off the screen to me. So it can get frustrating, but yeah, the IRS employees do appreciate it, because you're not just working with, you know, as a practitioner when you're resolving these cases, you're working with the people on the phone lines, you're working with the collectors at the local office, you're working with IRS attorneys sometimes, you're working with the taxpayer advocate office, you're working with the offer specialist, you're working with the auditors sometimes. So you're working with a whole slew of different people from the IRS, and they do appreciate when you're a professional, they do appreciate when you understand the terminology, and they do appreciate that you're actually working to close the case as quickly as possible. At our office, our goal is to quickly close the case. We have no interest in dragging on a case. I want the case appropriately closed as soon as we can, without rushing it. You know, we want to appropriately close the case. We're looking out for the interest of our client, and we want to make sure that they get this nightmare over with and they're moving on. They have a lot of things going on in their lives, whether on the personal side or the professional or both. And this is usually a big burden on their shoulders. They want to hurry up and address it. So efficiency, and when you're running a practice, and there's a lot of ways to have efficiency in your practice. And I train a lot of tax representatives, right? A lot of these tax resolution folks, and efficiency, and making sure you're doing many things as you can in one action, in order to help your client close their case as quickly as possible.
Very good. Hey, it's super exciting to talk to you. I think I should make a little differentiation for our clients. We do a lot with the audit side. It's crypto tax audit, as you can imagine, especially crypto investors. It's far better to win your case before the auditor's made a decision than, once he's made a decision that you owe such and such. Now you can't really talk about those issues as much. Now you're into, Michael's realm, which is how do we decide how much of that gets paid and how it gets paid and when. And it's just so important, I think, for someone to engage an experienced and serious professional. These national firms aren't good advocates for you, and I think I'm super excited to talk to Michael, because Michael offers the right solution for people with complex debt issues with the IRS, and it's far better to work with a professional. It'll make you sleep better at night, get your problem fixed, and know you're getting the best resolution you can. You don't have to worry about strangers on national corporations that are just trying to bilk you and demanding lots of money up front before they provide anything. So, hey, thank you. Tell everyone how they can reach you, Michael.
Yeah, so taxpayers can reach me directly anytime. So our website is landmarktaxgroup.com, and then they can reach me anytime directly at michael@landmarktaxgroup.com.
That's right. Landmark, LANDMARK, Tax
Yep.
Group. All right. Hey, super pleasure. Hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Clinton. I enjoyed it.